had been thoroughly fueled and checked. All of the staff took the Model T and went up to the 1,000-foot shelter. Each man had his precise piece of observation to undertake. One, of course, had a stopwatch to check the length of time of flight. One threw the switches for the electrical controls. Another had field glasses to note any revolution about its own axis of the rocket. And 3,000 feet away from the tower was a recording telescope manned by one of the observers. A cloud of black smoke allowed the movie camera operator to follow it a little more easily. This is an early informal picture of a device that my husband developed to persuade a patent office examiner to grant him certain claims in a patent covering a gyro to guide a rocket. It is very difficult to understand the principles of gyroscopes, and no blame should be attached to the patent office examiner. He got his patent on the basis of this device. The gyro operates under a very special system of laws, but it is the heart of the rocket. It controls the two sets of vanes that my husband developed to guide a rocket in space. One set is movable into the blast, down low. The other set is a little higher up and are folded against the side of the rocket. The first are called the blast vanes, and the second set are called the vanes movable into the streamline. In order to test the actual operation of these two sets of vanes from the gyro, we hung the rocket on our static testing tower in the other shop and tilted it in various directions to make sure that all was going well. The nose cone of our rocket contained a parachute, in fact two of them, one for the cap itself to come down on and one to help the main rocket to come down. It also contained a barograph from the National Aeronautics Association to make an official record of whatever altitude it might attain. The pump turbines were very complicated indeed. My husband had hoped that various pump companies might undertake to develop these because, after all, he was not a pump engineer. But all were shaken by the needs that he expressed. It had to be extremely high speed, which was perhaps attainable by the companies, but the matter of extremely lightweight was the one that stopped them. They said it would cost so much that they couldn't undertake the work. My husband sent a set of blueprints to one pump engineer who had impressed him well, and the engineer wrote back that the drawings were very good indeed, and he thought there was a chance they would work. So my husband's employees from those drawings made the pumps and turbines that are now in the rocket in the National Air Museum. Engineers who have seen this rocket have marveled at the quality of work, the close tolerances that his staff were able to maintain. We had a few flights with the pump turbine rocket before the war clouds came down far out on the desert near Roswell. Hitler was reaching great distances. In taking the moving pictures of these flights, it was necessary to gauge just from the point where propulsion visibly ceased, how high the coasting would go, and then where it would tilt downward and where the parachute would blossom. You see here a very beautiful descent by parachute. This was quite a problem to solve, this matter of re-entry, so that we could salvage a good portion of the rocket. It is difficult to have a parachute open at the maximum height because the conditions vary so at that time. We could salvage a good deal more than half the rocket usually if it came down by parachute.
In 1930, Daniel Guggenheim died. Later, Goddard's grant was suspended and work was stopped. But after 2 years back at Clark University, Goddard returned to New Mexico, for the grant was renewed by the Guggenheim Foundation itself. The very day after their return to Mescalero Ranch came a visitor, Charles Augustus Lindbergh, whose purpose was to spur on the deliberate Goddard in his work. May 1935, Nell climbed 7,500 feet, the highest to date. The town of Roswell was a fruitful town for the Goddards.
Oh, yes, indeed. The 30s were the golden years for the Goddards. We had a very pleasant place to live. The climate that was good for the rocket was also very good for my husband, although that was only incidental. And he could rest evenings at a nice, cool country home, paint on Sundays when he liked. He could also play the piano, and we occasionally went to the nice air-cooled moving picture theater to see Laurel and Hardy and some of his bourgeois, some of his other favorites.
March 1937. Nell had grown to 16 feet 5 inches long. Off she went. She rose higher and more nearly vertical than in any other previous flight, Goddard told his diary, between 8,000 and 9,000 feet. This was the high point of the space effort, entirely unofficial, of the United States of America. In 1939, Goddard and Lindbergh met for the last time. The meaning of the visit, let's move fast. They didn't know how much ahead of us the Germans were in this new science of rocketry. As the war in Europe broke out, Robert Goddard tried to interest the United States Army Air Corps in the potentiality of the 500-pound rocket that had been evolved. Harry Guggenheim, in the name of the Guggenheim Foundation, offered his private money to back up the defensive power of America.
My husband came to Washington and joined Mr. Guggenheim when the latter offered the entire shop in Roswell, the staff, my husband's services, and all the knowledge, know-how that had been worked out down there. My husband described what he had, showed the film. The military were politely interested, but they could see no future in the rocket as a separate weapon. They did envision it as a possible adjunct to the airplane then in existence. This would be a jet-assisted takeoff. One member of the meeting was a representative from the Army Air Corps, and I think he shocked almost everyone present by remarking that World War II would be won with mortars. The second thing that was, of course, much more pleasing to us was that a procession of young flyers had begun to come to Mescalero Ranch. These were fighter pilots, or also some of the commercial pilots, who had gained a keen sense of the limitations of the propeller, and they knew something fresh had to come. They were interested in this rocket. They thought possibly this was the answer, at least for bursts of power that might get them out of trouble in a pinch.
Goddards and their whole Mescalero team went to Annapolis, sometimes running as many as 50 tests a day. In September 1942, his JATO, or Jet-Assisted Takeoff motor, was put on a PBY flying boat and tested on the Severn River. The angle of climb was a lot better already than from a propeller thrust alone. The rocket, as a means of transportation, was on its way. On the sixth time, the pilot disconnected the safety device and burned the tail. The X-2 airplane, rocket-driven, was the next stage in the evolution of Goddard's rocket. Soon would come the X-15. the sounding rockets, the orbiting rockets. But Goddard was older now and ill. It was in 1944 that England, and then the entire world, discovered how well and how secretly the Germans had done their homework. Robert Goddard was dead at the age of 62, a victim of cancer. A generation has passed since Robert Goddard died. Space is no longer so distant from that long-ago cherry tree where a boy dreamed a dream that would not down. The boy became a man and said, "It is difficult to say what is impossible, for the dream of yesterday is the hope of today and the reality of tomorrow."
My husband felt that he was a very fortunate man, and I think few who knew him, even in Worcester or at Brussels, could not sense that my husband was a highly gifted and a very, very happy man, because he was doing precisely what he wanted to do most in all this world. As someone said a long time ago, the pursuit of truth is more precious than the attainment of it.